There are few ways an incarcerated person can get out of prison early. The best known is parole, a complicated and challenging process that's determined by a state parole board. Then there's clemency, a power that lies solely with the governor and is seen as a last resort. A video recently published by the New York Times highlights the work of a filmmaker who interviews incarcerated people around New York to help make their clemency cases.
Clemency is a broken system, and that brokenness keeps me employed. Lawyers actually hire filmmakers like me to use the tools of cinema to tug on the governor's heartstrings.
A conversation about making the case for clemency on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Long Run Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor in Lake Placid, providing comprehensive wealth management, retirement, and financial planning solutions. LongRunWealth.com. And the Devlin Inn and Suites, Lake Placid, welcoming families, athletes, and groups to the Olympic Village, offering Adirondack mountain views and dog-friendly accommodations. TheDevlinNY.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Wednesday, December 10th. First up, New York's 2 U.S. senators are calling on their Republican colleagues to vote in favor of extending Affordable Care Act tax credits for 3 years. Tomorrow, Democrats will force a vote on a 3-year extension of the subsidies. Almost 2 million New Yorkers use them to get help paying for their health insurance. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand spoke to reporters today to call on Republicans in the Senate to vote in favor of the plan.
If Republicans vote against extending the tax credits, they are voting against their own constituents, their own neighbors, and the financial well-being of working families across the country.
Republicans have proposed an alternative, health savings accounts. Senator Chuck Schumer called them a junk insurance plan.
The clearest, cleanest, easiest, and best path left is to bill what Democrats are proposing: a clean extension of current tax credits.
As it stands now, neither the Democratic or Republican plan has the bipartisan support needed for passage. The House of Representatives passed a bill by voice vote yesterday to ratify the settlement of the historic Mohawk land claim. The complex deal between New York State, 2 Mohawk tribal councils in Akwesasne, 2 counties, 2 towns, and the New York Power Authority was negotiated over decades. It requires congressional ratification because only the federal government can approve deals with sovereign native nations. The deal would immediately return 3,500 acres of land to Akwesasne Mohawk territory. It would also give Mohawks the right to buy additional land from willing sellers, as well as free tuition and $2 million a year from the New York Power Authority. North Country Congresswoman Elise Stefanik sponsored the bill in the House. In a press release, she said the historic agreement will greatly benefit our North Country communities. The bill now goes on to the U.S. Senate, where Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is expected to bring it to a floor vote. The St. Regis Mohawk tribe said regaining our land has been a long-standing goal shared by our ancestors and our community, and the settlement accomplishes that goal. Matt Nadell is a documentary filmmaker and co-founder of the Advocacy Video Project. He produces films for incarcerated people to help make their cases for clemency. Emily Russell spoke with Nadell about his work and why clemency is so rare.
Clemency has become much more difficult to achieve in recent decades. I did quite a bit of research in the state archives in New York to find evidence of this decline that had been sort of rumored, but there had been somewhat limited empirical observation around it. And there's a precipitous decline of clemency partway through the 1980s, continuing into the 90s. And we've seen it really go from triple digits per year to single digits per year. I mean, governors were giving hundreds of grants of clemency per year in a system that had exponentially fewer people in it in the first place. So the rate of clemency relative to the prison population has dropped even more precipitously. And I think the clearest explanation for that is the tough on crime era that was ushered in the 1980s and 90s. And I think there is a real political fear here where, there have been some couple high profile cases of people who got out of prison and reoffended and did really horrible things. There's no part of me that wants to sweep those stories under the rug. But I don't think that that needs to become the justification for shutting down an entire apparatus of mercy.
How much do you know about how the clemency process actually works? Like when you make a video for someone, where is it going? Who is actually watching it?
The process is a bit of a black box. There are a few people who know all the details, but the governor has a clemency board that's responsible for making recommendations to her about who should get clemency. And it's ultimately the governor's responsibility to sign off on any grants of clemency that she wishes to give. So the first stop that our videos go to is the clemency board. They're the gatekeepers, the sort of the bottleneck, and they're folks who spend all day reading files. And I can only imagine that it becomes hard to keep reading about the same situations of violence and trauma and remorse and not become desensitized to it in some way. And so the videos are an attempt to break through that and sort of shake a clemency board member and say, remember, like, this is a person's life you have in your hands.
So you've made about 36 of these films for incarcerated people. 2 of them have been granted clemency. One of them's name is Sky Williamson. What was it like to get a call from his lawyer saying that he was being released?
Hey, Matt, I just got off the phone with Sky, and the governor has granted clemency, and it wouldn't have happened without you. So thanks so much.
That was a pretty surreal moment, partially because that was the first video I had ever made. It was my first clemency video. And I had done it essentially as a favor to Sky's lawyer, who I knew from a previous project, and I had no idea at that point that I was about to fall into a real sort of life purpose. It was a surreal moment to understand that storytelling was not just something that could change cultural perceptions, but it was something that could literally help break somebody out of prison. And that the thing standing between Sky and his freedom was actually just that people did not understand clearly enough what had been done to him as a child and who he had become. And I feel incredibly grateful to have been part of the process of telling that story.
You've been in prisons all around New York State for this work. You've talked to dozens of incarcerated people and friends and family. You've encountered prison staff. How has this experience changed your perspective about the incarceration system as a whole in New York State?
Well, I think the system is not always set up for success. We have a system that's really overburdened. And what that means is that there are correction officers and prison staff who really want to be making a positive impact on people's lives, who really want to be facilitating their rehabilitation, but they do not have the time to sit with individual folks and really help them through that journey, especially people who come into prison with a lot of baggage, as a lot of people tend to. I mean, that can be quite an intensive process, and prison can be a chaotic environment, and we can't retain people. There's a staffing crisis regardless. Prison is not an environment that is conducive to people with any kind of special needs, especially the special needs that come with aging. And that ends up taking a lot of time from prison staff to facilitate those very basic survival and health needs so that they're not available to facilitate rehabilitation, which is what they're supposed to be doing. So I think there's a key element missing from the conversation about prison reform here, which is that staff doesn't have enough time and we can't hire enough more staff. We need to have an effective valve to let out people who no longer pose any risk to public safety and are languishing in prison. Right now, the only valve we have is clemency.
That was Matt Nadel speaking with Emily Russell. Nadel is a documentary filmmaker and co-founder of the Advocacy Video Project, which produces films for incarcerated people to help make their clemency cases. We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Saranac Lake and Jared Sommerfeld of Potsdam. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.